We've all been there. It's your birthday or Christmas, or your friend comes to your house for dinner and gives you a present that you really dislike. What can you say? You don't want to offend them. After all, it's the thought that counts. You don't want to lie, and at the same time, you don't want to offend anyone. In this podcast, we'll give you some ideas. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Hi Craig, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I hope all our listeners are feeling well. A big welcome to all of you, particularly if you're a new listener, but we like the oldies as well. Keep listening. You're all welcome here.
Yeah, it's my favourite time of the week, and we are kicking off. We're starting this week with a message from Maxi from Argentina.
Hello, Reza and Craig. How are you? It's Maxi from Argentina. I'm very glad because I found your podcast. I drive 70 kilometers to my job, about an hour, almost two, even 2.5 or 3 if traffic turns heavy. And well, I use it to listen music or radio in my car. But one day I was listening to Leonard Cohen and his song famous Blue Raincoat when I've noticed that I can understand his words.
Thanks, Maxi, for your message. Thanks very much. Craig, have you any comments for Maxi?
I think your name's Maxi, although your message wasn't very clear when you said your name. We really appreciate you taking the time to record and send us a message, but we didn't really understand some of it, and also it cut off, which means it stopped before you'd finished recording your message, and you didn't put an email address in there when you sent the message, and I can't contact anybody who doesn't put an email address in. So please, if you do send a message, make sure your email address is there. If I want to clarify anything and contact you, then I have an address to reach out and contact you on. What we did understand was that you are very glad, Maxi, because you found our podcast. You can also say, I'm very glad to have found your podcast. And we also understood that you have a long way to travel to work, an hour, 2 hours, an hour and a half. So you can also say you have a long commute. When you commute, you travel from outside the city, inside the city to work, and then you travel home again. And that is commuting. And a person who commutes is a commuter. So you have a very long commute, which is great for listening to podcasts, listening to music. Remember that preposition to after listen? I think you remembered it a couple of times and then once you forgot it, Maxi. So listen to the podcast. And one thing that we've been practicing a lot in my conversation course is something called shadowing. I don't know if you've practiced that with your students, Reza, where you listen to a very short piece of audio many times and you repeat it and you copy the intonation and the pronunciation of the native speaker. That's very useful if you have a long commute. You have lots of time, actually, to practice listening, repeating to improve your pronunciation. And to understand what people are saying, try to find a podcast with a transcription, like we do at inglespodcast.com, or some kind of text in a video that you can read so that you can read the text and listen at the same time.
Thanks very much for your audio, Maxi, all the way from Argentina.
Next, we have a voice message from Christina from Madrid, who practices some vocabulary that we spoke about in episode 452, in which we asked you to describe where you live and practice some of the vocabulary about housing.
Hello, I'm Cristina. I'm from Madrid. I live in a flat, in a block of flat in a city near to Madrid, Humanes de Madrid. This city is a dormitory city. My block of flat is in a urbanization with other 3 block of flats, have approximately 100 meters quadrados, and this flat is in a garden area, have a lot of parks, gardens, and it's very peaceful to live here. Above all, when you work in a city like Madrid, to come back to home is very beautiful and very peaceful because it's more quiet.
Thank you very much for your message, Christina. Well done on practicing that vocabulary from episode 452, Types of Houses. Excellent. Any comments, Reza?
That was a very good message, Christina. It was good and clear. Although I think we can help you with a few things. I think you said that you live in a block of flats. I didn't hear the word flats with an S. It sounded to me like you just said a block of flat. It may be the audio quality, I'm not sure. But don't forget to put a plural there, flats, a block of flats. And you said near to Madrid. That's a typical mistake. It's so common that it's almost beginning to sound right these days. But it isn't right. You don't say near plus to, it's just near. So you live near Madrid, or you could say close to Madrid. We put to with close. You live near Madrid or close to Madrid.
And a comment you made, Christina, about your flat where you live, you said it was 100 meters, and then I think you said cuadrados, which in English is square. So in English, you'd say 100 square meters or 80 square meters or 110 square meters, etc.
You said another thing which is correct. You said the city where you live is a dormitory city, or maybe might be better to say a dormitory town. A town is like a small city because usually a city is the important place, whereas a dormitory town is a less important place, but near the big city. So rather than dormitory city, it's more typical to say dormitory town. I checked to make sure that was right. It sounded right to me, and it was. And according to internet, it's more typical in American English. In British English, we'd be more likely to say satellite town. So dormitory town or satellite town. A town where people live and sleep, but they work somewhere else. In other words, you live on the commuter belt. You commute, you travel to work. So around lots of big cities, there's an area where people live, but they don't work. And it's called the commuter belt, where all the satellite towns or dormitory towns are found.
And while you were describing your area, Christina, where you live, which sounds very nice, by the way, you said have a lot of parks. Don't forget the subject. So the area has a lot of parks, or it has a lot of parks.
You also said something else which for a split second sounded right to me. And then I realized, no, it's not right. Maybe I've been living in Spain so long and listening to this mistake that it's beginning to sound right. Because if enough people say something, even though you know it's wrong, it begins to sound right, but it's not. You said that you lived in a nice urbanization. It's not urbanization. There is a word in English, urbanization, but it doesn't mean what you mean. Urbanization in English is making an area into a big town or city. That's urbanization. You live in una urbanización, which in English is a residential area. It's not urbanization. You live in a residential area.
And one final thing, Christina, you said that when you come back to home, and that's very clear, everybody understands that, although I would probably say when I get home, use the verb get. When I get home, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for your message. Well done on practicing that vocabulary, and it was really good to hear from you.
Thanks, Christina.
So let's go on to talk about the main focus of today's podcast, and that is what to say when you receive a present that you don't like, but maybe you think it's rude or impolite to reject it. So Reza, I've bought you something today to celebrate this episode. I've bought you this inflatable sex doll for your birthday. Here you are.
Wow, Craig, this is so unusual. How interesting.
I'm pleased you like it.
Well, listener, between you and me, listener, I don't really like it. But I didn't want to hurt Craig's feelings. So I said, this is so unusual, how interesting, but I don't really want his inflatable doll. It's not my cup of tea. But I had to say something.
So Reza said, wow, this is so unusual. How interesting. Now, all of these expressions we're going to say on the podcast, you can also see written in the show notes over at Ingles Podcast. But what's interesting is that it matters very much your intonation when you're saying these things, because some people will really notice the intonation more and the enthusiasm than the actual words you're using. So if you say, wow, this is so unusual, how interesting, you obviously don't like the inflatable doll. But if you say, wow, this is so unusual, how interesting, he didn't say he liked it, but his intonation did. What other expressions can people use, Reza?
I could have said to Craig when he presented me the inflatable doll, I've never seen anything like this. I didn't say it was good, did I? But my intonation implies that I like it. I've never seen anything like this.
Now, if somebody gives you an inflatable doll, maybe you don't know what to say. And that is exactly how you can express your reactions to the present. You can say, wow, I don't know what to say. And that could be a way of accepting a gift that you don't like or you don't want. So, whoa. Wow, I don't know what to say.
Imagine you think it was just not a good idea for that person to give you a present, or it wasn't the right occasion. They shouldn't have. Well, it doesn't sound very nice to put it like that. So you can say something like, you're far too kind. This kindness wasn't necessary, yeah, but you're going to take the gift because it would be rude not to. But you say with great enthusiasm, you're far too kind.
Or you shouldn't have, which means you shouldn't have gone to the trouble of buying this gift. So, oh, you're far too kind. You shouldn't have. Remember, you can connect these expressions together and make a longer exclamation. Another expression, how did you find it? So if it's an unusual gift, maybe you don't like it, but you can ask how the person found it. Wow. You're far too kind. How did you find it?
The next one is a bit risky, but you might like to go for it. You could say, I'll waste no time using it. That means, oh, right, okay, it's unusual, but, I'm not going to just throw it away or leave it around to gather dust. I'm going to use it. I'll waste no time using it, this inflatable doll that you bought me.
Well, it's ambiguous, isn't it? Because it could mean that you're going to use it immediately. So you're not going to waste any time, you're going to use it now. Or you're not going to malgastar your tiempo, you're not going to waste your time, so you're not going to use it. And I think Oscar Wilde said something similar. There was a famous quote when somebody sent him a copy of their new book, and he wrote a reply and said, thank you for sending me a copy of your new book. I'll waste no time reading it. Well, what does that mean? He's not going to waste his time on it, or he's going to read it immediately.
Another good one to show interest in the gift is to say, this must have been difficult to find. That's particularly good if it's an unusual gift. This must have been difficult to find.
Another expression you could use, thank you so much for thinking of me. It's very kind of you. Thank you so much for thinking of me. It's very kind of you. Notice with these expressions, we're not saying that we really like the present. We're just expressing maybe gratitude for the thought behind the present, but not necessarily for the present.
Another nice one is, thank you for the gift. I'll definitely find a good use for it. Sounds really enthusiastic, doesn't it? I didn't actually say I liked it. I didn't lie. I said, thank you for the gift. I'll definitely find a good use for it.
I'll throw it in the bin or I'll use it to keep the door open.
But don't say that. You can think it, but don't say it.
Another expression, thank you for taking the time to choose a gift for me. I really appreciate it. Notice you can use the word gift or present. They're very similar.
Another one you could say is, wow, this is really generous of you. Thank you so much. And you can be content that you haven't lied. It is generous, but you didn't say you liked it. So you're not a liar if you say, wow, this is really generous of you. Thank you so much.
And you can say, I must say, I wasn't expecting this. Wow, an inflatable doll. I wasn't expecting this.
Another nice one to say could be, I'm touched that you went out of your way to get me a gift. Thank you.
What does out of your way mean?
If someone goes out of their way, that means they made a special effort. It wasn't an easy thing to do. They had to actually make an effort to do it. And I'm touched. It's affected me. I feel affected by it. Obviously, a positive effect. I'm touched that you went out of your way to get me a gift. Thank you.
And when Reza says touched, he doesn't mean physically. Nobody physically touched him, but emotionally he was affected or touched by the gesture, by the action of the gift giver. I'm touched that you went out of your way to get me a gift. And another one, thanks for thinking of me and getting me a gift. I'll definitely treasure the thought behind it. So I'm not going to treasure, which means to really appreciate something. I'm not going to treasure the gift itself, but I'll definitely treasure the thought behind it.
A similar kind of idea is behind the reply. I appreciate the effort you put into choosing a gift for me. Thank you. So I'm not saying I appreciate specifically this gift. It's my ideal gift. No, but the effort, yes. I appreciate the effort you put into choosing a gift for me. Thank you.
Reza, have you ever received a present you didn't like? And if you did you keep it?
I think 99% of the time I've kept gifts that I didn't really want. Once or twice, maybe I haven't, if it was from somebody who I didn't know very well or didn't have much connection with, and it was a gift that didn't really mean much, I may have possibly given away a gift or something like that, but not to people I know. What about you?
Again, it depends on who's given it to me. If I didn't like it, but I really like the person, I might keep it. But you would keep a gift, even if it wasn't your taste. If it was something that you thought was ugly or not your style, doesn't suit you, you'd still keep it or maybe wear it, even though you didn't like it, just because of the person who gave it to you.
I would, if the person means a lot to me.
Interesting.
I've kind of had the boot on the other foot, so to speak. That means instead of the person receiving the gift, I've been a person who has given a gift, and I've been a bit offended by the reaction of the person who received it. Let me explain. I was invited to... I can criticize this person now. They won't be listening to this podcast, and I would be in good company criticizing her. I was invited to a birthday party of my brother's ex-wife, the word ex, X is crucial there. You can imagine he will not be bothered in the least that I criticize her. Now, I was invited to her birthday party at their house, but
And it was her birthday.
her birthday, yeah, and a few other people were going. So, for me, if I get invited to somebody's birthday party and I'm told in advance that it's their birthday party, for me, it's a given that you must bring a present. Sometimes I've been invited to people's parties, but I didn't know it was their birthday and I didn't bring them a present and I felt bad about it, but I didn't know. But if I'm told in advance, I bring a present. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I agree.
So I did that, and the other people who were invited did exactly the same.
What did you take?
I can't remember what I took, but I do remember that it was pretty good. I think it was maybe a bag. Yeah, it was quite a nice handbag. And it wasn't really expensive, but it wasn't cheap either. It was a good gift, and I did put a little bit of effort into it. I must admit, I never particularly cared for her, but since it was my brother's wife at the time, I thought I'll put a bit of effort into it. Okay, so as well as that, by the way, she said, oh yeah, and when you're coming down, could you bring a few potatoes? Because we wanted to make something with potatoes, but we don't have any. So I bought a couple of wine, I bought a couple of potatoes. I helped make the potato dish, by the way, did some of the cooking with my brother, which didn't help my mood later. And then the hostess, the birthday girl, to cut a long story short, she had a bit too much to drink, which is fine. That's not the end of the world. But I wonder if it added to her behavior. So people gave her the presents, and here's your birthday present. Thanks very much for inviting me. She didn't open any of them. She put them all into a big bag. And then later, she opened them and all kind of quickly said, oh, I like this, I don't like this is good, blah, blah, blah. But not bothering even to ask who the present was from.
So she didn't know who had given her these
No,
presents?
she didn't know and did not care. That was the thing. And that bothered me. That really bothered me. And I think it probably bothered other people as well. Nobody said anything, but, you know, if somebody goes to the effort of buying you a present, you've said it's your birthday, they buy you a present, and there was about 8 or 9 of us, something like that, at least ask who gave you the present, right? I thought it was so rude. It really bothered me. Was I overreacting to be bothered?
No, I would feel the same. You obviously had wrapped the present up in paper, so it was impossible to see the present when you gave it to her. And when she opened it later, she didn't know it was from you.
Yeah, and me or the other guests, she didn't know who gave what, and never asked afterwards. She just clearly wasn't interested.
Yeah.
I thought that was very rude, to be honest.
It was. But that would have benefited the guests that didn't spend a lot of money and bought a pair of socks. Then nobody would know.
Yeah, that's true.
But what happens if somebody gives you a present and you don't like it and you want to reject it and refuse it and say that you don't like it? How can you do that politely? What can you say to get the message across that you don't like what you've been given? Any ideas, Reza?
Well, this is even more sensitive than
It is.
than accepting something you don't really like. Here we're talking about rejecting it. So you've got to proceed with great caution. Be very careful. Here's one. What about this? I really appreciate the gesture, but I'm not sure if this is quite my style. So the concept of gesture and style. So gesture, yeah, the fact that you bought it for me, that's good. But as for style, I don't like it. That gets you out of a bad situation. So you say you're not taking it because it's not your style. But you do appreciate the gesture.
And notice the vague language to make that statement softer in the second part. I'm not sure if this is quite my style. So you can use I'm not sure as a negative way of rejecting something. If you don't agree with someone, you can say I'm not sure I agree, which means I don't agree, but it sounds softer. I'm not sure, which really means I don't know, but it's stronger than that here. I'm not sure if this is quite my style. And that quite does soften as well the exclamation.
Craig, what if somebody bought you a selection of brasiers?
Underwear.
Underwear for women.
I'd go on a diet immediately.
That's a very good answer. Yeah, yeah. I wonder. They might be saying that they noticed that you were growing moobs, which are man boobs, perhaps.
What I would probably say, Reza, is, well, that's very thoughtful of you to give me these bras, but I don't think it's something that I can use. So say, for example, someone buys you something for the kitchen and you never cook, then perhaps you'd say, well, that's a very nice thought, but I don't think it's something I can use because I don't cook.
Notice the language again. The truth is, it's something that you cannot use. But instead of saying that, you say, but I don't think it's something that I can use. But in fact, you know it's something you can't use, but you smoothen. That's to make it smooth, suavizar, smoothen the blow, the boof. I don't think it's something that I can use.
Another tactic that British English speakers often use is to apologize before something negative. For example, I'm afraid I don't agree is softer than I don't agree, using that I'm afraid. So if you can't accept something for whatever reason, you could say, I'm afraid I can't accept this, though I really appreciate your kindness. So you are thanking them for their kindness, but at the same time, you're rejecting it. Remember, all of these expressions are on the website, inglespodcast.com.
Another one, which is very common, is thank you for the lovely gift. It's just not quite my taste. The word just here is very handy. It's a very flexible word, just. Here it basically means but. But it's not quite my taste. It's just not quite my taste. That word just implies there's a slight problem, little complication here. It's just not quite my taste.
Do you think the people in your family appreciate your taste? Do you get appropriate presents from people in your family that fits in with your taste?
Usually from family, yeah. What about you?
I never did. No, when my parents were alive, and my sister doesn't really appreciate my taste very well, but that's okay. It's the thought behind the present that's important. I can also say this is such a kind gesture, but it's not quite what I was expecting. Again, that word quite, Quite, to soften it. It was in the previous sentence, not quite my taste.
Here's another one. Thanks for the gift. It's very sweet of you. However, it's not really my thing. So I've said you're sweet, but it's not really my thing. Or you might even say it's not my style, as we said earlier. It's not my thing means it's not the type of thing that I like. Thanks for the gift. It's very sweet of you. However, it's not really my thing. And the word really seems to, a bit like quite, smoothen the blow a little bit, smoothen the rejection.
And here in Spain, it's very common to give presents with a ticket that you can exchange at the store or the shop if you don't like the gift. So it doesn't usually say the price on it, but it is a receipt that you can use to buy something else, or maybe a different size if it's something to wear. So you could say, if you don't like the shirt you've been given, well, thank you for the gift. Thank you for the shirt. It was very considerate of you, but I hope you don't mind if I exchange it for something that suits me better. Thank you so much for the cookery book. Unfortunately, I don't cook. I'm never cooking in the kitchen, so I hope you don't mind if I exchange it for something that suits me better.
Another nice one could be this. I'm grateful. I'm grateful means I feel gratitude. I'm grateful for your thoughtfulness and generosity, even if this gift isn't quite my cup of tea. Quite tricky to say the word thoughtfulness, isn't it? I'm grateful for your thoughtfulness and generosity, even if this gift isn't quite my cup of tea. Again, the word quite makes it sound a bit less direct. And my cup of tea, in other words, not my style, not the typical thing I like.
Thank you for buying me Darjeeling, but I only drink Earl Grey. It's not quite my cup of tea. Now, We hope these expressions will be useful for you next time you get a present that you're not really that enthusiastic about. And if you want to practice these, one suggestion is to shadow us. What does that mean? Well, these expressions are quite short. You can listen to the podcast again and read these words on the webpage, inglespodcast.com. Read the words with us as we're saying them. So shadow, copy us as we're speaking, and that will improve your pronunciation and your fluency. And if you're listening to this in March 2023, there will be more conversation courses with me and a small group of motivated students. If you're interested, send me an email, craig@inglespodcast.com, and I'll give you more details.
And now it's your turn to practice. Why not send us a voice message? There's a link in the show notes to speakpipe.com/inglespodcast where you can record an audio message. Bear in mind, though, there's a time limit of 90 seconds. Craig, if people want to write to us, where could they send an email?
I've just given you my email, Craig, CRAIG, @inglespodcast.com. And to reach Reza, write to him at belfastreza, REZA, @gmail.com.
We'd just like to remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Why don't you visit the online store where there are lots of interesting products? Go to store, that's STORE, store.mansioningles.net.
And before we head out the door this week, we would be amiss if we didn't thank all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. And you too can join our Patreon program for as little as $1.50 per month. That's including the value-added tax. And with that very small payment of a price of a cup of coffee, you get instant access to recent transcriptions. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/inglespodcast for more information.
The most recent sponsors, but not all the sponsors, we don't have time to mention them all, but people who've newly joined the scheme are Luz Viviana Moreno, Carlos, Maria Madariaga, Pedro Carrillo, Susana, and two people who are paying more than the minimum. Thanks very much to Francisco Otero and Arnhild Kessel.
Thank you to you and to everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. We're not sure what we're talking about next week, but we do promise there will be an episode next Sunday. Until then, have a wonderful week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's goodbye from Craig.
Music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.